Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're diving straight into what is arguably the defining paradox of our time. We've got unprecedented material wealth, right? Literally mind-boggling technology. But at the same time, we're experiencing this massive, undeniable spiritual deficit. It's like we're empty inside despite having everything. We're going to unpack a fascinating piece of research that diagnoses this exact condition and offers a completely paradigm-shifting solution. We'll be taking a journey from the core of our linear economic crisis all the way to the cyclic economic view found within Daesoon thought. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive right into this. The source material hits us with a glaring reality right off the bat. Our super-developed, high-tech material civilization is frequently leaving modern people completely spiritually starved. We have this absolute abundance of stuff, yet no true internal satisfaction. The research points out that our current economic philosophies, whether you're talking libertarianism, communitarianism, social contract theory, or utilitarianism, they're all kind of stuck in these incredibly rigid frameworks. And the central argument here? These frameworks are essentially paralyzed. They literally can't organically solve the complex crises they create because they rely on fixed, linear assumptions about what motivates us and how society should be structured.
So, are we trapped in the myth of Sisyphus? The source frames this whole systemic paralysis by asking this exact rhetorical question. It argues that modern society is stuck in a paralyzed, linear economic system governed by a one-sided logic of basically only taking and never giving. It's a profound structural paralysis of circulation. Think about it. When wealth, energy, and resources only move in one direction, like accumulating at the very top or just being entirely consumed, they never cycle back to nourish the actual roots of society. It's like the boulder rolling endlessly back down the hill over and over because the system just doesn't have a return mechanism.
Here's the roadmap for this explainer. 1. The modern economic crisis. 2. 4 axes of paralysis. 3. The cyclic economic view. 4. Bridging East and West. And finally, 5. Restoring harmonious circulation. Don't worry, we're going to unpack all these complex concepts step by step. Section 1. The modern economic crisis. The paralysis of circulation. The absolute core argument driving this first section is that the virtuous cycle between our economy, our ethics, and our religion has fundamentally broken down. The source describes modern society as being trapped in a state of linear rationalization, what it calls the iron cage. When we operate solely on a linear track, focusing purely on infinite economic growth on a very finite planet, or just sticking to rigid zero-sum rules, we basically build a cage that cannot fix its own internal fractures. Without a built-in way to organically redistribute wealth and ethical responsibility, society just falls into a crisis of deep distrust. We're locked in. And the source argues the only true escape is adopting an entirely new method of thinking, a method of circulation. Moving right along to Section 2. 4 axes of paralysis. How deep the crisis goes. Let's see how this builds. Now, the source doesn't just give us some abstract theory about this iron cage. It maps out how this circulatory paralysis shows up in 4 distinct real-world crises. First, on the axis of the individual and the economy, we're seeing a total collapse of economic motivation. Work just loses its deeper purpose and becomes sheer drudgery. Second, looking at the individual and ethics, there's a near-complete disappearance of economic ethics in personal behavior. Then, zooming out to the community and the economy, we see these massive, paralyzing clashes of systemic ideologies. Just think of the friction between raw capitalism and centralized communism. And finally, community and ethics, which scales all the way up to a global environmental crisis. The really fascinating takeaway here is that the source views these not as random accidents, but as perfectly interlocked gears in a massive machine of circulatory failure. And looking at the environment, this is perhaps the most glaring, tangible consequence of that one-sided economic logic that only extracts and never replenishes. It's the ultimate symptom of a system where our ethical obligation to the planet, and really to future generations, has been totally severed from our day-to-day economic actions. When that community ethics axis is broken, the environment is absolutely the first thing to pay the price. All right, Section 3, the cyclic economic view, a pluralistic solution. Time to shift from the problem to the paradigm shift.
So, the crucial point is, how do we actually break out of this iron cage? Well, the foundational answer found within Daesoon thought is this. Money is a thing created and used through the principle of circulation. In this view, wealth isn't some high score to be linearly accumulated until the whole game inevitably crashes. By its very nature and design, money is meant to circulate. It's kind of like blood pumping through a physical body, right? If the blood stops circulating and just pools in one area, the body goes into shock. Same goes for the economy. And that brings us to this critical concept, pluralistic circularity. The source defines this as an economic view where religion, economy, community, and ethics aren't just siloed off in their own little corners. Instead, they mutually circulate to achieve harmony. It's a super fascinating, integrative approach. It actually synthesizes the foundational strengths of Confucian ethics, Buddhist compassion, Taoist natural flow, and Western rationalism all together. It doesn't reject economic growth, which is key. Rather, it pursues economic balance strictly through continuous, cyclic redistribution and the mutual flourishing of both the individual and the community. And this brilliantly illustrates the idea. Conceptually, you can picture these spheres, religion, economy, community, and ethics, as entirely overlapping and interdependent. You simply cannot have a healthy economy without a thriving community, and you can't maintain a thriving community without a solid bedrock of ethics and shared values. They literally have to constantly feed into one another. Bringing ethics back into the economy isn't just some pie-in-the-sky utopian ideal. In this research, it is a mechanical, structural requirement for the societal system to keep spinning harmoniously without just tearing itself apart. This source grounds this deeply in a traditional Eastern economic principle summarized perfectly by the maxim, virtue is the root, wealth is the branch. The argument here is wonderfully straightforward. Ethical mandates absolutely must precede economic action. Think of it like a tree. If you focus all your energy only on the branch, the wealth, while completely neglecting the roots, the tree's eventually going to die. Ethics have to come first to make the circulatory regeneration of the economy possible at all.
Moving to Section 4, Bridging East and West, Historical and Scientific Context. This is where the research sets up an incredibly compelling historical comparison to validate this cyclic view. On one side, we've got Max Weber's famous analysis, which links linear Calvinist religious thought directly to the rise of Western capitalism. But on the flip side, the source points to a really surprising historical bridge, Matteo Ricci, a 16th century Jesuit missionary. The research highlights the claim that Ricci basically acted as a crucial intellectual medium, bringing Chinese cyclic economic thought back to the West, which in turn helps spark modern Western capitalism. It suggests that this deep cross-cultural cyclic exchange was actually the true driver of global economic development. How crazy is that?
Furthermore, the source connects this cyclic philosophy straight to natural science. It argues circulation is the ultimate postmodern method for solving our crises. It compares it directly to how Albert Einstein solved the rigid limitations of linear Newtonian physics by relativizing it through cyclic, higher-dimensional concepts. It also points to modern complexity theory in economics. Basically, this proves that pluralistic circularity isn't just a nice metaphor. It's a higher-dimensional movement capable of actually reconciling opposing linear forces and breaking deadlocks that standard linear thinking simply cannot process.
Okay, final section, Section 5. Restoring harmonious circulation, the concrete effects. Let's see the tangible benefits. So, what actually happens when we finally tear down that linear iron cage? Well, the ultimate goal is a profound restoration of balance. By shifting to a cyclic economy based on Daesoon thought, the concrete effects include recovering our personal motivation to work, restoring actual ethics in our business practices, and balancing the needs of the individual with the needs of the community. Looking at the bigger picture, it provides a genuinely actionable framework to fundamentally resolve the environmental crisis and to cool down those fierce ideological clashes that are currently paralyzing us. Now, what's really interesting about this is that when mapped out conceptually, the ultimate solution is surprisingly elegant. A basic, continuous, cyclical flow is literally all it takes to heal those 4 axes of paralysis we talked about earlier. It's the harmonious, unending circulation of religion, economy, and ethics. When wealth is viewed not as an end goal to be trapped in a cage, but as a tool created by the principle of circulation to serve communal and ethical needs, the entire societal system finally begins to heal and regenerate itself. The source concludes that we urgently need this pluralistic cyclic thinking to overcome the sheer weight of our modern economic problems. And it leaves us with a challenge that requires some real, sustained reflection. If our modern crisis is born from a one-sided logic of taking, how can we actually apply this cyclic ethic of giving and circulating to our own daily economic lives? How do we, as individuals, start breaking the bars of our own iron cages to ensure our wealth, our ethics, and our communities flow together in harmony? It's a profound perspective to consider. Thanks for exploring it with me today.